Chapter 1: The Unexpected Encounter. It was an ordinary morning for Edgar. The kind of morning that didn't promise anything out of the ordinary, yet held the potential for something life-changing. He woke up early, as he always did, stretching his arms and letting out a tired sigh. Another day of work awaited. But this time, it would be different. Edgar was a ride-share driver, a job that didn't necessarily offer the glamour of a corner office or the prestige of a high-powered career. But it gave him the freedom to control his hours and the ability to provide for his family. That was what mattered. He wasn't a man who had dreams of becoming a millionaire or a world-renowned success. His dreams were simpler: to work hard, help his family, and build a future. As he prepared his car for the day, he couldn't help but feel a sense of routine settling over him. He knew the streets, the routes, and the neighborhoods like the back of his hand. He knew when to avoid the traffic jams and when to take shortcuts. But today, he had an odd feeling, a sense that something was about to happen, something big. Edgar tapped on his phone screen, accepting the next ride request. It was from a nearby address, right in the heart of the city. He shrugged, checked the time, and drove toward the location, pushing away any lingering thoughts of his personal life. When he arrived, he was greeted by the sight of a young woman standing outside a sleek, modern building. She was beautiful. Her auburn hair cascaded down her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled like stars in the daylight. Edgar cleared his throat, caught off guard by how stunning she looked. But he was a professional, and he knew how to keep his composure. He smiled as he rolled down the window. "Good morning," he said politely. "Are you Jenny?" "Yes, that's me," she replied with a smile, her voice sweet, almost melodic. "I'm sorry for the delay, I just finished up a meeting. I really appreciate you coming to pick me up." "No problem," Edgar responded, his voice calm and steady. "Hop in, let's get you where you need to go." As she settled into the back seat, Edgar started the engine and pulled out onto the street. He could tell from her posture that she was the type of person who was used to a certain lifestyle. She had an air of sophistication about her, a confidence that seemed to come naturally. Yet, she didn't carry herself with arrogance, just grace. The city streets were chaotic. There was construction everywhere, with traffic cones blocking lanes and detours at every turn. But Edgar didn't panic. He'd been driving for long enough to know that panicking never helped. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, steering the car smoothly through the maze of vehicles. "Sorry about the traffic," Edgar said after a while, glancing in the rearview mirror. "The city's been under construction for weeks now. It's always a mess." Jenny chuckled softly. "It's fine. I'm used to it. Besides, I've been through worse. You'd be surprised how much time I've spent sitting in traffic. I suppose it's just part of living in a big city, right?" Edgar smiled at her words. She had an easygoing demeanor, and her laughter was contagious. It made the slow crawl through the city streets feel less irritating. As the minutes passed, he noticed her talking more freely, sharing stories about her life, her ambitions, and the challenges she faced. She told him about her career ambitions in the legal field, her struggle to balance work and personal life, and even some of the funny moments that occurred during her college years. "You know," Jenny said thoughtfully, "I've always dreamed of becoming a lawyer. My father's been a lawyer my whole life, and it's always felt like the natural path for me. But it's not always as glamorous as people think. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of competition. Sometimes, I wonder if I'm cut out for it." Edgar listened intently. He wasn't used to hearing people talk so openly about their fears and dreams. Most of his passengers were in a rush, or simply didn't engage in conversation. But Jenny wasn't like that. She had a warmth about her that made Edgar feel comfortable, even though they had just met. "Sounds like you've got a lot on your plate," Edgar said, glancing back at her through the mirror. "But if you're determined, I'm sure you'll make it. It's not easy, but nothing worth doing ever is." Jenny smiled, the corners of her lips curling up. "Thanks. I appreciate that." They continued talking, and Edgar found himself captivated by her presence. The mundane reality of the traffic and the noise of the busy streets seemed to fade away as he focused on their conversation. There was something about her, her intellect, her kindness, and the way she spoke with such passion about her goals. Edgar was drawn to her in a way he hadn't expected. But before he knew it, they had reached her destination, a cozy little cafe near the edge of the city. Jenny looked out the window, clearly relieved to be getting out of the car. "Well, this is me," she said, her voice a bit softer now. "Thank you so much for the ride. It was nice talking to you." "It was my pleasure," Edgar replied, feeling a strange sense of reluctance. He didn't want the conversation to end. "Have a great day." Jenny stepped out of the car, and Edgar watched as she walked toward the cafe. He started to pull away, ready to head to his next passenger. But as he did, something caught his eye. In the back seat, he noticed a shiny cell phone resting on the seat. He picked it up carefully, the screen lighting up with a message. It was from Jenny, a reminder about something she had left behind. "Hey, I think my phone fell out of my purse. Could we meet somewhere so I can get it back?" Edgar couldn't help but smile. It was an excuse to see her again. He typed a quick response, agreeing to meet at the cafe where she was now sitting. Here's the continuation for the next part of the story. Chapter 2, Family Obstacles. The cafe was quiet, a peaceful contrast to the hustle and bustle of the city outside. Edgar parked his car and walked inside, the door chiming softly as he entered. He scanned the room, quickly spotting Jenny sitting at a corner table by the window. She was sipping a cup of coffee, her posture elegant and poised, as if she belonged in this kind of setting, the kind of place where people with power and status gathered. Edgar felt out of place. His work clothes, a simple t-shirt and jeans, felt too casual, too plain for a place like this. He hesitated for a moment, but then he saw her look up. She smiled, and for a brief moment, all the doubts faded. "Hey, Edgar." Jenny waved, her eyes bright. "I'm so glad we could meet again." "Yeah, me too," Edgar said with a smile, walking over to the table. "I wasn't sure if you'd still be here, but I'm glad I could return your phone." As he sat down across from her, Jenny placed her cup on the table, a slight smile still on her face. "I didn't expect you to come back so quickly. But I'm happy you did. So, how have you been?" she asked, her voice warm, as if picking up from where their previous conversation had left off. Edgar scratched the back of his neck, slightly uncomfortable but trying to hide it. Same old, same old. Still driving, still trying to make ends meet. It's a grind, you know?" Jenny nodded sympathetically, her gaze soft. "I can't even imagine what it's like. I mean, my life is so different. My family has always had everything we needed. But I do get it, you know. I've worked hard for my place, too." They spent the next few minutes talking, catching up on each other's lives, and the conversation flowed easily. Edgar found himself relaxing more in her company. Jenny's presence had a calming effect on him, like everything was somehow going to be all right. But soon, the conversation turned to a more serious topic. "So, I have to ask," Jenny began, her tone a bit more hesitant now. "How do you feel about us? About us, you know?" Edgar's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected her to bring this up, at least not so soon. He took a deep breath, trying to remain composed. "I think you're amazing, Jenny. You're smart, and beautiful, and driven. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want more with you. But I also know that things aren't exactly easy for us." Jenny's brow furrowed slightly, her lips pressed together in thought. "What do you mean by that?" "It's just. Well, we come from different worlds," Edgar said, his voice hesitant. "Your family is wealthy, successful. You have everything set up for you. And I'm just trying to figure things out." Jenny didn't seem upset by his words, but rather contemplative. She set her coffee down and looked at him with a serious expression. "You think that's going to be a problem?" "I don't know," Edgar replied. "It's just hard to imagine how this could work. Especially when your family, your father, probably wouldn't approve. I mean, we both know well, let's just say he's not a fan of me." Jenny's eyes darkened a bit. "You're right. My father has a very specific view of what's acceptable. And unfortunately, you're not exactly what he would consider worthy of me." Edgar winced at the words, but he knew she was right. Jenny's father, George, was a powerful lawyer, a man of influence who had built his empire from the ground up. He was used to associating with people who had similar status. Edgar knew the man would never accept someone like him, a man whose life had been shaped by hard work and struggle, rather than privilege. "I've tried to talk to him," Jenny continued, her voice softer now. "But he doesn't get it. He doesn't see what I see in you. All he sees is a ride-share driver, a guy who doesn't have a fancy job or a prestigious degree. He's not the type to care about someone's character or heart, he only cares about status." Edgar nodded, his heart sinking a little. "I get it. And I don't want to put you in a tough position. You deserve someone who fits into your world, someone your family will accept. I don't want to be the reason you're torn between me and your family." Jenny's expression softened, and she reached across the table, gently placing her hand over his. "You don't get it, Edgar. I care about you. More than you know. And I don't want to just pick what's easiest. I want to choose what feels right. But I also don't want you to feel like you have to change who you are just to fit into my world. I don't know if I can change, Jenny. I'm not sure I want to. I'm proud of who I am. But sometimes, it feels like It's never going to be enough. Jenny squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with empathy. I understand. I really do. But we'll figure this out together. You don't have to be perfect for me. I just need you to be you. Edgar couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope, even though he knew the road ahead would be difficult. They were facing an uphill battle, but somehow, with her words, it felt a little less daunting. Here is the continuation for the next chapter of the story. Chapter 3, The Heartbreaking Proposal. The day of Jenny's graduation arrived with a bright, clear sky, the kind of day that seemed full of promise. The auditorium buzzed with energy as proud parents, friends, and faculty filled the seats to witness the culmination of years of hard work and dedication. Jenny stood at the front with her classmates, her posture regal, her eyes gleaming with excitement and pride. She had done it, she had earned her degree in law, a dream she had worked tirelessly to achieve. Edgar, dressed in a simple yet sharp suit, sat nervously in the audience. He had come to support her, as he always did, but today was different. Today, he had something special planned. He had been holding on to this moment for months, the perfect moment to show Jenny how much he loved her, how much he believed in their future together. The ceremony was long, but Edgar's mind wasn't on the speeches or the awards. His mind was on the small box in his pocket. The engagement ring he had carefully picked out, the symbol of his commitment to her. He had envisioned this moment 1,000 times, the two of them, standing together, their hands intertwined, as he asked her to spend the rest of her life with him. He had dreamed of this day, imagining her joyful smile, the happiness in her eyes as she said yes. As the final speeches concluded and the graduates began to rise, Edgar's pulse quickened. He caught Jenny's eye across the room, and she flashed him a smile. It was a smile that made his heart skip a beat. He knew then that there was no turning back. This was the moment. He had to do it. When the ceremony ended, and the applause filled the room, Edgar made his way through the crowd toward the stage. He knew it wouldn't be long before Jenny joined her family. He had to get to her first, before her father, George, could speak to her. There was no time to waste. Jenny spotted him and excused herself from her friends. She walked toward him, her face glowing with happiness. Edgar. I'm so glad you made it. She exclaimed, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Edgar replied, his voice thick with emotion. You did it, Jenny. I'm so proud of you. Thank you, Edgar. She pulled back slightly, her hands still resting on his shoulders. This is such an amazing day, and I'm so happy you're here to share it with me. Edgar smiled, his heart full of love and admiration for her. This was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet box, his hands shaking slightly. Jenny raised an eyebrow, noticing the box. She looked at him, confused. Edgar? What's this? She asked, her voice a little uncertain. I wanted to ask you something, Jenny, Edgar said, his voice suddenly nervous. You've made me so incredibly happy, and I can't imagine my life without you. So, I've been thinking. Jenny's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. Edgar dropped to one knee, holding the ring in front of her. The crowd around them began to quiet as they realized what was unfolding. Edgar's heart pounded in his chest. Jenny, will you marry me? Jenny blinked, her lips parted in surprise. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could respond, a loud voice interrupted them. Absolutely not, a deep, authoritative voice boomed. Edgar's heart sank. He looked up to see Jenny's father, George, standing nearby, his eyes burning with anger. He was dressed impeccably, his face stern, and his posture commanding. There was no mistaking the displeasure in his expression. You've got some nerve, boy, George continued, his voice icy. You think I'm going to let an uneducated, low-class driver marry my daughter? The crowd fell silent, the tension in the air palpable. Jenny's face drained of color as her father's harsh words echoed in her ears. She looked at Edgar, then back at her father, her eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. Edgar, on one knee, froze. His world seemed to crash down around him. I'm sorry, Mr. Walker, Edgar stammered, standing up slowly, the ring still in his hand. I didn't mean to upset you. I only wanted to. Upset me? George snapped, taking a step forward. You think you can just waltz in here and take my daughter away from everything I've worked for? You don't have what it takes to be part of this family. You'll never be good enough for her. My daughter deserves someone who has the background, the education, and the status to match hers, not some common driver. Jenny opened her mouth to speak, but her father's glare silenced her. Edgar stood there, stunned, his heart pounding painfully in his chest. His vision blurred as his feelings of rejection took root. He had known, deep down, that this would be difficult, but he had never imagined it would be this brutal. The man he had hoped would accept him was now openly rejecting him in front of everyone. "Please, don't speak like that," Jenny finally managed to say, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. Edgar is a good man. He's kind, and he's worked so hard for everything he has." George shook his head. "You think kindness is enough? No, it's not. He's nothing more than a distraction. I won't allow this. You're going to finish law school, get a real job, and marry someone who deserves you." Jenny took a step toward her father, her face a mixture of anger and disappointment. "I can't believe you're saying this. You're so caught up in your own expectations that you can't see the person I love."
I love him, Dad.
"And I won't let you tear us apart." But George's face remained cold and resolute. "This is over, Jenny. And I won't tolerate any more talk about this. It ends here." With those final words, he turned and walked away, leaving Edgar standing there, the ring still clenched tightly in his hand. Jenny stood motionless for a long moment, tears welling up in her eyes. She reached out to Edgar, but he couldn't bear to look at her. "Jenny," Edgar whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this. I can't be the reason you're torn between your family and me." She opened her mouth to protest, but Edgar shook his head, his voice filled with sorrow. "I love you, Jenny. But I think it's best if we go our separate ways." As he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, Jenny's heart shattered into pieces. The man she loved had just walked out of her life. And her father's words had cut deeper than she ever thought possible. Here's the continuation for the next chapter of the story. Chapter 4, Paths That Part. The days following Edgar's decision were filled with an aching quiet. He had made the hardest choice of his life, but in his heart, he knew it was the right one. His life had always been marked by struggle, by working hard for every step he took, and he wasn't about to let his love for Jenny cost her the future she deserved. He couldn't be the person who made her choose between him and her family. Jenny had spent years building her reputation, earning her law degree, and making her way into the world her father had carved for her. Edgar would never want to stand in the way of that. Jenny tried to reach him countless times after the graduation day, but he kept his distance, unable to face her, knowing that they couldn't be together. The pain of it all was too much to bear. He had seen the disappointment in her eyes, and that image haunted him every moment. He threw himself into work. Every morning, he would wake up early, get into his car, and start his shift, trying to block out the thoughts of Jenny and what could have been. The work wasn't easy, but it was a distraction. It kept him busy and kept his mind from wandering to places he knew would only bring him more pain. But every time he picked up a passenger, a part of him wondered what might have been. He missed the sound of Jenny's laugh, the way she spoke so passionately about her career and the world she wanted to change. He missed the simple moments with her, the warmth of her hand in his, and the quiet conversations they shared. Weeks passed, then months. Edgar found himself working more hours than ever, trying to push forward, trying to forget. His car became his sanctuary, the only place where he didn't have to think about the life he had walked away from. Meanwhile, Jenny struggled as well. She focused on her career, throwing herself into her studies and trying to please her father. She still had the ring Edgar had given her, though she never wore it. It sat in a small drawer in her room, a painful reminder of the man she loved and the life she had lost. But despite everything, Jenny never stopped thinking about him. Edgar's face was always in her mind. She knew that they came from different worlds, but that didn't change the way she felt. No matter how hard she tried to focus on her career, no matter how much her father pushed her to move forward with someone more suitable, Edgar's memory lingered. She couldn't let go of him. The months turned into a year, and still, the pain of their separation weighed heavily on both of them. Jenny's career was progressing, and her father's influence in the legal world was only growing. Yet, despite the success she was achieving, there was an empty space in her life where Edgar used to be. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a mistake by letting him go. She had always believed that love was about more than status and family expectations. But with each passing day, it seemed that love and family were the two forces that would always be at odds in her life. It was a morning like any other when the call came. Edgar had just finished his early shift and was preparing to grab some coffee when his phone buzzed with a notification. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him he should answer. "Hello?" Edgar's voice was cautious. "Edgar?" A voice on the other end, familiar and sharp. "It's George. I need to speak with you. Now." Edgar felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't heard from Jenny's father in over a year, and the last time they spoke, it had been anything but civil. George had made it clear that Edgar was nothing but a disappointment to him. So why now? Mr. Walker? Edgar replied cautiously, his grip tightening on the phone. What's this about? I have a job for you, George said, his tone cold but measured. It's a case. I need someone who can handle it. You know your way around the city, right? I'll explain the details later. You'll come to my office this afternoon. No more questions. Edgar's mind raced. What kind of case could George possibly need his help with? But before he could protest, George hung up. The rest of the day was a blur as Edgar tried to prepare himself for whatever was to come. He couldn't help but wonder why George had reached out after all this time. Did he need him for something important, or was it some sort of twisted test? By the time Edgar arrived at George's office, his nerves were on edge. The sleek, modern building stood as a testament to George's success. Edgar's steps felt heavy as he walked into the building, the security guard giving him a pointed glance as he passed. This was a world Edgar wasn't used to, the world of lawyers and high-powered executives, a world where every detail mattered and every mistake could cost you everything. When he reached George's office, he was ushered inside without much ceremony. George sat behind a large desk, papers stacked neatly in front of him. His stern expression softened slightly when he saw Edgar enter, but there was no warmth in his eyes. Sit, George ordered, his voice firm. Edgar sat down, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. George studied him for a long moment, as if sizing him up. I've heard things about you, George finally spoke. You've been working hard, I hear. You've made something of yourself. But now I need your help. Edgar frowned. What kind of help? One of my clients is in trouble, George said, leaning forward. A young man, a politician's son. He's been accused of something serious, hit and run. And I need someone who can look into things, find out what's really going on. Someone who knows the city like the back of his hand. Edgar felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew this wasn't going to be simple. He'd heard about the case in the news. The son of a wealthy politician, accused of hitting a woman and leaving her paralyzed. It had been a high-profile case, and George was one of the top lawyers handling the defense. But Edgar wasn't sure he wanted to get involved. I'm not sure this is a case I want to be a part of, Edgar said, his voice tight. Listen, George interrupted. This is your chance to prove yourself. You've always wanted to be something more, haven't you? This is your chance to finally show me you're capable of more than just driving a car. Edgar's chest tightened as George's words hit him like a punch. He had always worked hard, always tried to prove his worth, but it seemed that no matter how far he went, George would never see him as anything more than an outsider. But now, with this case, perhaps it was time to take a different path.
If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and motivates us to continue sharing heartwarming, inspiring stories almost every day.